Do you ever get your fingers tangled up when you're sight reading? Do you ever get in a situation where you're sight reading along and then all of a sudden you run out of fingers, or you end up doing this strange fingering because you weren't really looking ahead and planning ahead? Well, I think we've all been there. If you want some help with that, then keep watching this video. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. I'm Manu from Piano Sight Reading, where I give sight reading tips to piano players. In this video, I'm going to show you a few tricks you can use so that you can easily navigate a score if you don't have any fingering. So these are tricks that you can use on the spot while you are sight reading, and hopefully it will help you avoid those situations where you get your hands and your fingers all tangled up. I will be showing you examples with some music, and I will also share a few fingering rules that you can apply either when you're sight reading or when you're working out fingering in your pieces. Alright, let's get to the piano. So first off, let's look at a scenario where your piece is written within a 5-finger position. So obviously that's the easiest scenario to be in. That's where your hand would be in one place and doesn't need to move. But you might still need to work out where to put your hand. So in that situation, you just need to look at where the bottom note is and where the top note is. So if we take our right hand, the bottom note will be played with your thumb and the top note with your pinky, and vice versa in the left hand. So I have one example here for the right hand, and we can see that the bottom note, the lowest note is C, and the highest note is G. So that means you would place your thumb on the C, and then that means that the first note, E, will be played with your third finger. And then you just keep your hand in that position. So that's the easiest scenario to be in, but of course most of the time we have to go beyond a 5-finger position. So let's look at a few ways we can navigate this kind of scenario. So one obvious way would be to use the thumb, like you do when you play a scale. At some point you use the thumb so that you can play more than 5 notes. If we look at the first example here in the right hand, if you look at the second bar, the notes are going higher up. So to be able to play those higher notes, we can use the thumb. And actually it works out that you can use the thumb as you would if playing your G major scale, because this is in G. So you would start with the thumb on G, because this is your lowest note, and then use the thumb on the C in the second bar. Okay, and in the second last bar, you stay in position, but you're just going down one note with the thumb. So you don't need to change position, you're just stretching out the thumb a bit further down. And I'll give also an example in the left hand, where again the notes go lower, so then you would want to use your thumb. Usually you would use the thumb after the third finger, like you would in a scale, or you might use it after a second finger. Those are the usual places, or you could use after the fourth finger. So the idea is to look ahead and see, okay, how many fingers do I still need? At a glance, try to see if you know you're going to need at least 5 of the fingers, then that's where you want to use the thumb. You can also use the thumb and the pinky for larger intervals. So to give you an example of that, say you have this melody in the right hand. In bar 3 you have an octave. Now an octave, usually you would use fingers 1 and 5. And so what you do is you want to get the thumb on the lower G so that you can then play the higher G with the 5th finger. And then you go to thumb here. Because if you don't use the thumb, then you get in trouble when you get to the G. So you have to think ahead and prepare for any large intervals like an octave. One rule that is good to know is that for any large intervals, you want to use fingers 1 and 2, so the thumb and the second finger, because this is where you can really have a big distance. You can't really have a big distance between any other adjacent fingers. The 2 that you can use for larger intervals would be 1 and 2. So say you have this next melody in the right hand, the bottom note, the lowest note is E, but then the highest note is E. So that means you somehow have to extend the hand. And the way to do that would be to play that bigger interval of a fourth between the first 2 notes, to play that with first finger and second finger, because then you have the remaining fingers for the higher notes. So you go 1, 2, 3, and then here you can go back down to the thumb, because you can easily reach. Another way you can easily change your hand position is when you have different phrases, articulations, or rests. So in the first example, you have 3 different phrases. Now usually with a phrase at the piano, you drop on the first note and you lift on the last note of the phrase. So you can use that to your advantage and place your hand in a new position when starting a new phrase. So for example, this one here, you start off with thumb on C. Now here you need to go a bit higher, so you could use 4 or 3, but you wouldn't want to use 5 because then you can't play the A. So you would need to swap either for 4th finger or 3rd finger. Now again, we need to go higher, but because it's the end of that phrase, you can just move your hand, and you would use 2 because the lowest note is B. So B would be with the thumb and C would be with the second finger. Same thing when you have rests. That's when you can lift your hand and go into a new position. So in this example, start with 3 on G. Okay, now I need to move because we're going higher, and you would use thumb on C because that's the lowest note of those next few bars. And when it comes to passages with detached notes, so notes with dots on them, staccato notes, that's when you can really just change your hand position whichever way you like. That's really where you can be the freest. For example, here you could start on 2 on C. Now you can just swap and go to a 3. Okay, and then again you can move. And just remember that when the notes are detached, even though like in bar 3 where you go thumb and then you go down to 3, you don't need to do this thing where you have the finger over the thumb, because anyway you're lifting the hand. Because I say this because I've seen some of my students who still have the habit of putting the finger over the thumb when really they don't need to. You just move the hand. Yeah, you don't need to do any funny business when the notes are detached. Another trick you can use, say you get in trouble at some point, but you happen to be on a longer note, you can quickly switch fingers. For example, say you have this passage in the right hand and you're playing. Now you realize that you need to go higher up. So you could quickly switch to a 3. So you're switching, you're still holding down the note, but you're just substituting the finger. And then you're okay to go for the rest. And if you're not used to this kind of motion, you can just practice. You can start with 2 and 1, so switching from 2 and 1. Just play, say, a C scale, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. So you're switching silently. Then you can try with 3 and 2. It will feel a bit strange, but it's a good technique to know. It can be really useful when you get in a tough spot where you need to change your hand position. And similarly to that, you can switch your fingers when you have repeated notes. So for example, in this following example, in the left hand, you can start with the pinky on B flat. Now here I would need to change because I need to go lower. But because we're repeating, you can lift the hand. So you can go 4 and then swap to a 1. So you can reach the bottom F. So repeated notes are really good for that, for switching fingers and switching the hand position. A good rule to use, fingering rule, is to use the longer fingers on the black keys. So if you look at your hand, you're like most of us, fingers 2, 3 and 4 should be the longer fingers. So those are the ones you want to use on the black keys whenever possible. Because the moment you use the shorter fingers, the thumb and the pinky on the black keys, your hand has to go inside the keys and it's not as comfortable to play. So whenever you can, use the longer fingers on the black keys. So for example, for this passage here, you have this. Now this next note is an E flat, so black key. So it's easier to use a longer fingers, finger 2 on the black key. So sometimes it's good to scan and see where your black keys will be, and then reserve those black keys for the longer fingers. So by starting this passage with your thumb, then you can use the second finger over the thumb. But sometimes it's not practical to actually avoid the thumb and the pinky on the black keys, because sometimes you just have too many flats or sharps. So for example, in this one, you would want to start with the thumb on the E flat, because otherwise you can't really reach the notes. So what's also useful is just to learn the fingering for common patterns. So learning your fingering for scales, for arpeggios, for chords. If you can get used to these fingering and make them automatic, then when you find these common patterns in a piece, then you can usually then quickly play that passage. You don't even need to think. So that's why we practice all those patterns, the scales, the arpeggios, the chords. It's so that when we get to a piece, whether we're sight reading or learning a piece, that we don't have to think, it just becomes automatic. And something else to keep in mind too is that when you have repeated patterns, melodic patterns, say you have this here where you have the same rhythm for each phrase, it's usually good to use the same fingering. So if you notice a pattern repeating and it happens to be phrases, then you try to use the same fingering, because then your hand learns the pattern quicker. And my last piece of advice when it comes to working out fingering on the spot is, of course, to try to read ahead as much as possible. And that can just be seeing that the melody is going beyond a 5-finger position. If you can see just far enough to see, okay, it's going to go further up, I need to do something here, I need to use the thumb or substitute a finger. If you can at least watch out for those, for when it goes higher or lower than your current position. If you can get used to quickly spotting where the notes might be going outside a 5-finger position, then you're already on the right track. Try these different tricks I shared with you today. The most obvious one is to use the thumb. Whenever you feel you're about to run out of fingers, try to use the thumb. When you have rests, that's where you can look at the next phrase and go, okay, do I need to change hand position or can I stay? Because that's the best time to change position if you need to. When you have detached notes, that's when you can freely change. That's really the easiest way to change hand position, when you can lift the hand. And also with repeated notes. The moment you have repeated notes, use them to change position if you need to. Okay, well, I hope you found this video useful. If you did, then please like it and share it with your fellow musicians. Let me know in the comments if you have any other tricks when it comes to fingering. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Happy sight reading!